your trusted local news source, KCRG TV9.
Hello and welcome back to a special edition of your trusted local podcast. I'm Becky Phelps.
And I am Beth Malicki, and we are so grateful for you to join us. We know a lot of you are interested in true crime, cold cases, and frankly, justice. And we've been working very hard, especially Becky here, to bring you this special podcast.
So recently, we had a case pop up in our press releases or emails. We got a heads up from the Linn County Sheriff's Office that something was going to break. We weren't exactly sure what, but something was going to happen, and it was related to a cold case. So today we are tackling the cold case of 24-year-old Ron Novak and his murder that happened in 1983.
We have not covered much about this story in the 20 years that I've been here at KCRG TV9, with the exception of a cold case story we did in 2017, essentially saying that the case was still considered open. They were not giving us much information, and by they, I mean the Linn County Sheriff's Department, because that's their jurisdiction for this story, for this case, this crime. And then, like you said, in our inbox was all of a sudden a major update.
Major update. So first we're going to take you back and give you a little bit of background here. So let's go back to 1983, December 23rd, freezing day.
Not a regular freezing.
Very serious snowstorm.
So very cold that it's one of those days, and we usually get, 4 or 5 of them, I feel like a year in Iowa, that it's so cold that schools have to cancel, that people have to limit their time outdoors, not just because it's uncomfortable, because we're talking deadly level of cold, and that cold did play a part in this case.
Yes. So on December 23rd, that's about the time that this crime happened. They're not sure exactly when, because it took a moment for a friend to go to the house and find Ron Novak's body. And that is, of course, when Linn County Sheriff's Department was called and when they responded, and they found an incredibly gruesome scene. Ron Novak lived in rural Linn County on a home on Rolling Acres Road. That's about 3 miles north of Center Point. And he lived alone, but had some dogs, some golden retrievers. When his friend arrived, Christmas Eve, to visit for the holidays, he found Ron dead. Hands tied behind his back, beaten with hammers and golf clubs, and then shot. And there was so much damage to Ron Novak's body that it took a while to find out exactly what killed him.
And they later determined that he was beaten. You might argue torture is the appropriate word here. And he was shot last. Now, when they got the autopsy results, because he was left in a portion of his own home that was not heated, they say that not only his injuries in the gunshot wound obviously contributed to his death, but that factor of how cold it was also contributed in him not being able to survive those injuries. Because we're talking about an otherwise healthy 24-year-old, and when his friend found him, again with his hands tied behind his back, that is just such a horrible, sad detail, but it also gives some clues.
Yes. So of course investigators then start to look for a motive. Why did this happen? Why did someone go to this home in rural Linn County on one of the worst days of the year and then do this horrific thing? They also found in the home not just the bloody scene, they found about $32,000 in cash and about $7,000 worth of marijuana.
And let's put ourselves in the time and space. Let's go back to early 80s. And there was, and there probably, I think there still is to this day, some stigma and some bias against people who trade in illegal things, such as, obviously, at that time, cannabis was not legal for any usage in the United States of America. And some in Ron Novak's circle were concerned that because he was a suspected drug dealer, and this may have been what precipitated his murder, that maybe his case did not get the attention that it deserved. Now, of course, investigators would counter that characterization, but it is something that we heard from the family then, and we heard from the family in 2017 when then reporter Forrest Saunders revisited the story. But those are the facts. That's quite a bit of cash even in today's dollars, to find around the home, and not an insignificant amount of marijuana.
Absolutely not. And that formed their original thought of a motive. Was this a break-in, a robbery? Was someone attempting to, get this cash and this marijuana out of Ron Novak's home? And why didn't they take it?
Yeah, they left it.
Yeah.
What?
A lot of questions around there. And again, you mentioned we talked with the family of Novak, specifically Novak's sister, Patty Wilson, in, I believe, 2016 and 2017, who has never given up on trying to speak out about her brother and find some answers about this case. We're going to play you some older sound bites from Patty Wilson, Ron Novak's sister, talking about the reaction when she heard that her brother was killed and how she felt in the years since. Take a listen.
When my brother came in and said he was dead, I said, what do you mean, a car accident? What? And then when he said he was murdered, that just rips your gut out. He loved the dogs. Some ways he was just still a big kid. He was only 24. He hadn't grown up yet. Maybe he'd be married and have kids of his own, but he never got the chance. Part of me has to settle, and you have to find some way to go on with your life, and it can't be every minute of your life is about it. He wasn't exactly doing legal stuff, and there were probably rough people that maybe he was involved with, but nobody deserves that. Nobody. Just unbelievable that they haven't been able to find someone.
That feeling of wondering if maybe the stigma around Ron Novak's death had contributed to the investigation and maybe some missing points along the way, that kind of haunted the family for a while. The Sheriff's Department said, absolutely not the case. Not only did they not forget, in an interview with TV9, it said that it haunted them, that they were just searching and searching for answers. In 2010, Major Chad Colston became a detective, and he got a hold of the Novak case. That was a common tactic when fresh eyes came in the department. Let's hand it over, see if this guy sees anything we didn't see. Why not?
Absolutely.
Can't hurt the case. Shortly after that, they did get some news. Officers discovered a blood sample from the crime scene that did not belong to Ron Novak. They went to a crime scene, they had no matches, and then things did go quiet for a while. But that was really the first kind of sign of hope for any kind of progress in now, 30 years since the murder? Which is a very long time to wait for answers.
And then one thing we have to keep in mind is what they could glean from the crime scene in 1983 is very different from how policing can approach crime scenes today. And obviously at the time there was not the DNA advancements we have in this day and age. But it doesn't mean they just threw those items of clothing or that evidence away. There's places in, I want to say, every jurisdiction in the United States of America that has somewhere with a lot of evidence, either in boxes or in files or some combination of the two, and holding on to that evidence can yield results.
Absolutely. That foresight is incredibly important in these cold cases. Just waiting for those fresh eyes with the new technology, something to have a break in the case and hopefully bring some justice to the families. More than 40 years later, something finally clicks with this case. And in May of 2025 of this year, Linn County Sheriff's Department announced they had arrested someone in Ron Novak's murder, which came a bit of a surprise to everyone, including the family who was there at the announcement.
Didn't they hear just the day before?
Yes, they had just heard that something was happening, and they had kind of been aware that DNA was being sent places.
Okay.
But, you don't get your hopes up too high.
So an arrest is made, an arrest is announced, the Sheriff's Department holds a press conference to get media and the general public up to speed. For whatever reason, I was surprised when I learned how far away the suspect is now living.
Yes. So they announced they had arrested 65-year-old Michael Schappert, who lived in Fairview, Oregon, on the other side of the country from Iowa.
Truly.
Very, very far away. He's facing 1 count of murder in the first degree.
Wow.
So they announced this arrest, and when they announced it, he was still in Oregon. So they announced this press conference, and they say the break comes due to developments in DNA technology. They directly credit to DNA technology. And they brought about a dozen members of Novak's family and friends in to make the announcement. And we will play you a clip of that press conference now, hearing from the Linn County Sheriff's and the Linn County Attorney's Office.
We recognize the pain and trauma that Mr. Novak's loved ones have endured for more than 40 years while this murder went unsolved. It takes strength to endure such hardship and to remain hopeful that someday the person or persons responsible would be caught and brought to justice. The Linn County Sheriff's Office remains committed to seeing this case through. I also want to thank the deputies who initially investigated this heinous murder and who had the forethought and training to properly collect and safeguard the evidence located at the scene. I also want to thank the deputies who continued to diligently pursue leads and new technologies in this case throughout the years that ultimately led to Michael Schappert's arrest.
That this case is a testament to the fact that in Linn County, no unsolved homicide is ever closed. And that sometimes, like this family has been through, the road in the pursuit of justice is long, but it never ends. And we're happy to report that we took a big step on that road today towards justice for this family and for Mr. Novak.
This is some video of Michael Schappert in Oregon after he was arrested. Again, when they made the announcement, he wasn't even back in Iowa yet. And so in the days after, he signed a waiver of extradition on Friday. And that meant that they immediately, overnight, they flew him back to Iowa. And that is when we started getting some more details on the case and the investigation. Because before an arrest, much of that is kept very close to the chest. They don't want to compromise anything in the investigation.
Exactly. And it's worth noting, I'm sure so many people already know this, but even though it's 40 some odd years after the death of Ron Novak, there is no statute of limitations in the state of Iowa, and I believe every other state.
I believe so.
When it comes to murder. So that's why they can bring charges, almost a generation later. It is curious that he agreed to extradition.
I agree.
Schappert did not fight it, and we see a lot of suspects saying, I'm not going to sign that. You're going to have to go through the court system and stretch out me getting transferred back to the jurisdiction where the crime originated.
We were not expecting it to move so quickly. When learning that he was being held in Oregon still, we thought, well, this is going to take a minute to get him back here. He signed it on Friday. He was back in Linn County on Saturday morning.
So you generally cover weekends.
Yes.
And so with this element of the story happened on your watch. And then the criminal complaint came out. Did that come out on the Sunday?
That came out on Saturday.
So you
Same
really
day.
were one of the first people to dig through it.
Yes, so we get emails on weekend mornings, perhaps weekday mornings also. I'm not sure. I don't check the email at that time.
Yeah.
But on weekend mornings, we get emails from Linn County saying this is who's come in, who's been arraigned today.
Got it.
And we kind of just look through those, see if there's any charges that we should be keeping an eye on, any names that are familiar. And we're looking through, and there's Michael Schappert's name.
Wow.
Was not expecting that.
No.
So we go into Iowa Courts Online and type in his name and see what the latest is in online, and they have filed the criminal complaint.
So criminal complaints, for friends who aren't in law enforcement or aren't on the prosecutor side of things or the defense side of things, it is where you get so much detail into what the investigation revealed and what the prosecution is alleging. There are times when we don't even know why a person is arrested other than the arresting charge, which can be pretty vague.
Very.
But that criminal complaint outside of a trial or any court filings between the criminal complaint and the trial is in a criminal case where we really start to put that picture together. And update us. I haven't looked at that criminal complaint in a minute. What did we glean?
A lot.
Okay.
So this is the closest that we get to the thought process, really, behind the arrest. So we not only find out more about the scene, we get some more details about the scene. We also find out how they got to Michael Schappert.
Yeah, he's all the way in Oregon.
So we find some more details about the scene, which I will warn does get a little bit graphic. So if you're sensitive to that, you may want to skip ahead a little bit. They found out, deputies found not just Novak tied up and beaten. There was blood smeared around the home. There were traces of hair and blood on many of the weapons used, the hammers, a golf club, firewood. And they also found DNA on Novak's socks.
Okay.
That's the DNA sample that led them to a suspect.
What was on the walls? Because you can't put a wall. I mean, I guess you could cut out drywall, but think of putting a sock in a evidence bag. That is a more obvious choice.
Yeah.
Huh.
So that led them to a DNA profile.
Okay.
They went to a lab in July of 2011 and for a long time just sat there. They didn't have any hits, nothing went through until June of 2020.
So what changed?
So they worked with a company called Parabon Nanolabs.
Okay, we've heard of them before. They've been crucial in other cold cases that have been solved. I'm thinking Michelle Martinko, the woman who was a teenager, a Kennedy High School student in the mall parking lot at what was then Westdale Mall, found dead inside her family vehicle. And they too were able to connect it to a suspect. And he was later convicted that otherwise seemed to have no relevant connection to her. So Parabon, say that name again?
Parabon Nanolabs.
Thank you, okay.
Yes, yeah. In June of 2020, after all these years, it identified possible relatives to the DNA profile they have.
Okay.
So they said, oh, this has some similarities. We could be getting somewhere. TV9 talked with Cece Moore, who is the chief genetic genealogist at Parabon, about how that works.
Okay.
How they can kind of make the leap of saying, oh, this could be even a little bit related, this could be a lead. So take a listen to Cece.
So although there are over 50 million people who have taken direct-to-consumer DNA tests, we are limited to just family tree DNA and GEDmatch, and then the new database, the nonprofit database called DNA Justice. And those only contain about 2 million people who can be compared against. But the reason it's so effective is because it will tell us if someone even shares a small amount of DNA with this unknown suspect. And so it is compared to everyone in the databases that has opted into law enforcement matching. And then we get a list of people who share DNA with that unknown suspect. And in this case, everybody shared less than 1% of their DNA. And so these were really distant relatives, which makes it very difficult. And so it took quite a lot of collaboration between the genetic genealogist and the detective. So we have to generate more data when we don't have enough in the databases. So we use the matches that we have in there, which are partial matches. These are distant relatives, to try to get additional data points by reaching out to other family members and asking if they are willing to provide their DNA for comparison as well. So we really owe some people a big debt of gratitude for agreeing to help with this case, for realizing how badly this case needed to be solved. And so when we do our work correctly and we have enough data to do that, then we can often narrow it down to just one family, which is what happened in this case. And at that point, law enforcement has to completely take over. Our job is done. We can't tell the difference between siblings because they have the same family tree. So they're going to be related to these matches in the same way.
So the original match was likely third or fourth cousins.
I don't think I know any third or fourth cousins. That's far.
It is very far removed. So they go from way out here, and like Cece said, they have to ask people's permission. They have to go out and say, hey, any chance you want to give us your DNA?
To eliminate or find. Okay, so real talk here. Have you ever done one of these?
No, I have no idea how they work, and other than this research.
So I bought them for Christmas for my family members, including myself, and I tried either 2 or 3 times to scrape the inside of my mouth, and you put it in the tube and you mail it back, and every time they said, you are not emitting enough cells.
What?
So they gave me my money back, but everybody else in my family was fine, so apparently I'm a robot. I don't know. But I do, I'm wondering now, because you have to fill out all these questionnaires. I can't remember if I opted in. I don't remember a question about if your DNA aligns, would you share your DNA with a Justice League or whatever,
Right.
these databases that might be able to solve crimes. I can't remember if that question was in front of me. I'm sure that it was. But I think a lot of people are uncomfortable by the idea, even if it would solve a crime that deserves solving, and that's, of course, all of them and many people's opinions, and not so much in others, they don't want to be dragged in, and they don't want to drag a family member.
Yes. It's handing over yourself and your DNA
Yeah.
and saying, sure, I'm going to just let you do whatever you want to do with that.
So out of the 50 million, only 2 million people say, great, if grandma needs to go down, I'm fine.
Which is a pretty small number.
It's a very small percentage, right?
Yeah,
But it's
yeah.
still 2 million.
It's in some cases, enough.
See, I'm a rule follower, and I feel like, in general, if you did something regarding a crime where there's no statute of limitations, so we're talking first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, first-degree sexual, really horrific, not that like lesser forms aren't horrific, but you know what I mean. I kind of feel like, well, but then I can hear other people
If you were offered the
barking.
box again, you think you'd hit yes?
I do. I think that I would. And I also recognize that there is an argument to be made that law enforcement is not infallible. And even with DNA on their side, there can be impropriety. And that people who are innocent are in this country at times convicted. So I understand those arguments. And I kind of believe the science. I'm a big science
They
friend.
are very confident.
They're
about it.
very confident.
Very confident.
Okay, and I know you're going to get to this, but the guy they arrested, Mr. Schappert, kind of gave some indications that he knew this was coming.
Yeah, a little bit of a teaser. We're going to
Yeah,
hear
we'll get
from
there. We'll get there.
Yeah, some people very close to Michael Schappert about his behavior before the arrest.
But just think, in 1983, the idea that blood left over from a sock, you could scrape the world's tiniest amount of sample and then be able to narrow down a family tree to a single person. And it's not just through the DNA. She mentioned it. It's some police work here as well.
Yes, so they got it down to a family, and then the
Okay.
police had to take over.
And what do police do at that juncture?
Yeah, so this was really fascinating to me, and also very complicated. And I read this portion of the criminal complaint many times
This is
just
our
to make
life.
sure I understood exactly what happened. So they got it narrowed down to the Schappert family, a group of 3 brothers. And then the investigators went in and they took what they called covert DNA samples.
That feels like stealing DNA without people knowing.
Doesn't it sound like it? The image that comes up in my head, and I don't know exactly what happened, but the image that comes up in my head is them like going into the trash can.
That's exactly what I'm picturing. It reminds me of the serial rapist and murderer in California, and that's how they were able to finally make that arrest. I think it was from a trash can.
Yeah, that's exactly what comes to mind.
Okay, but we don't know. We just know it was
It
covert.
was a covert. That is the phrase used.
Okay.
And that is they eliminated 2 of the brothers through the covert DNA samples,
Leaving Ron.
leaving Michael.
Leaving Michael. Ron Novak is the victim. My
Yes.
apologies.
And in August of 2022, they got a covert sample of Michael Schappert's DNA.
Okay.
More than a year later, they collected a known sample.
Well, what does that mean?
They went to Schappert and they interviewed him and collected a known sample of DNA.
He willingly either swabbed or donated blood or whatever.
Or
Gave blood to
they
the
got
police.
some kind of order to make him, I'm not sure. I don't know
Okay.
if you can do that.
But it's direct.
Yeah, a known, like, we are going to take your DNA
Okay.
and test it.
So he knew.
That was in December of 2023. Yes. And they interviewed him. They sat down with him and asked him a lot of questions. And in that interview, Schappert placed himself in Iowa at the time of the murder. He told investigators he had been hitchhiking through Iowa in 1983, but did not explain why his DNA could have been found at the crime scene. And then investigators learned that Schappert told his brother on a phone call, he was on a phone call with a brother, and said that he had been at Novak's home with another person while they were out trapping. And he told his brother on this phone call that they were out trapping, there was an injury, and they already knew Novak, so they just went there to clean up.
It sounds really suspect. Real sus, as the kids would say.
The investigators thought so too. They said generally, based off of what we know about Novak,
Yeah.
and that he's a private person who lives out in a rural county,
Yeah.
there's no way he would have done that. They don't think so.
Yeah. Come on over and clean up your situation from, what are they trapping? Trapping beavers?
Trapping on one of the worst
Raccoons?
days
It's
of the
negative
year.
23 air temperature.
Yes.
Negative 23.
And they're out
You could
trapping.
die. No, they're not. I just,
Yeah, that's
my
what
vibe.
that's what investigators thought.
Okay, all right.
So a year and a half after that interview, the arrest was announced.
They must have been getting all their ducks in a row. And by they, I mean law enforcement and Nick Maybanks at the Linn
This
County Prosecutor's
process,
Office.
even after they got the DNA
Yeah.
hit, let's see, the first, oh, maybe we have some DNA
Mm-hmm.
was in June of 2020. Possible relatives identified. 5 years later.
Wow. Think of Novak's family. I believe his parents had since died.
Yes.
Since his murder, died not knowing who was responsible for the loss of their son. That's horrifying.
It is. But on the day of the presser, there were about a dozen people there who, and some of them, when they opened up to questions from the media, some of the folks there who knew Novak were asking questions.
Oh, wow.
They were just so... There was a lot of relief in the room.
Yeah.
I think
What were their questions like? I'm just curious.
they were wondering, like, the timeline of things and,
Yeah.
and just how they got there. And it was very, very interesting. But they were so present. They were so ready for this.
Yeah, yeah.
So ready for this. And we did get to catch up with Patty, Novak's sister, again, and get her immediate reaction at that press conference. Take a listen.
It's just still surreal. The phone rang this morning. I had no idea who was calling and what about, and I thought maybe when they started talking they were going to give me maybe a little bit more update. I didn't expect this. For a while it was very disappointing because it felt like nothing was being done, and it's only been about a year and a half since we found out they had the DNA that they were working on. So it's been a long time waiting for something to come of that. But I appreciate them being thorough and being sure that whoever they prosecute is going to be the one and that he pays his price. I mean, he got to live his life. My brother didn't. Just him and anyone else that thinks of doing these kinds of things, you have no clue how it affects a family from, 8-year-old on down and all the way back up. My kids, my nieces, my nephews, our grandkids, everybody's been kind of shaped by this in some way. Just, I hope everybody that was involved pays their price.
Everybody who was involved. She's very aware that if Michael Schappert did indeed commit this crime, they don't believe, police, investigators, law enforcement don't believe he acted alone.
Absolutely. Yeah. This press conference, they made a point of saying this isn't over yet. We made this arrest. We're not done with it. They have, since the beginning, believed that it would have taken more than one person to commit this murder. Yeah. So after 40 years, a little bit of closure there for Patty.
So that press conference was on Friday.
Oh my
Of
goodness.
that
I
week?
think it was Wednesday.
Criminal complaint comes out over the weekend, and then it wasn't until even into the next week that we got more insight into what Michael Schappert has been doing these last decades.
Like Patty said, he got to live his life.
He really did. He was married, he had children, he had jobs, he wrote books.
I've heard about the books. You know a little bit more about the books than I do.
Well, Nick Maybanks, the prosecutor for Linn County, was the one who let us know that his books are available on Amazon. They are not books that you would find at a traditional bookstore. I believe they're self-published. They're, in my opinion, kind of odd. He seems to want to give advice about how to live a life.
Oh, like a self-help book?
Kind of. It's a real journey. And also, I'm not saying AI wrote the books. But I'm not saying AI didn't. I actually have no idea. But we read some excerpts, and it was a journey. It's the best way I can summarize it.
I'm sure investigators
Publicly.
also read the books.
Oh, and what's interesting is, what if he dropped hints in there about his own timeline?
Yeah.
Or about guilt that was never, I didn't buy the books, I didn't read them fully. I have no idea if they go deeper into Mr. Schappert's insight.
You wonder what they were doing for all those years, lining up their ducks. It may have involved reading all these books, learning everything they possibly could about their suspect.
And then we had an interesting interview that our partners in the state of Oregon did with the suspect, Michael Schappert's now ex-wife.
Yes, KPTV did this interview. The reporter Spencer Schatt, I believe. And we want to thank, of course, our affiliates for doing this interview.
Yes.
This was a fascinating listen, because they did this interview and then we got to listen through it and use it for some of our stories that we were turning. And it was, it's so interesting to listen to.
It's also a masterclass. Kudos to that reporter in not reacting. Because it was a Zoom interview.
Yes.
And so his face is on the screen the whole time. And his ex-wife, she is Lisa, and is it pronounced Flegel?
I believe so, yes.
Flegel?
Yes.
She shared some, at times, disturbing details about her relationship with Michael Schappert, including they met when she was, I believe, 14.
14, he was 31.
And he was a friend of her stepfather's, and they moved into each other, and she moved into his home pretty quickly into their relationship. And it did not sound great.
Yeah, we're going to hear it from Lisa a little
Okay.
bit. So we're going to listen to a piece of that interview from Spencer with KPTV, talking to Lisa about her relationship with her ex-husband, Michael Schappert.
And so over the years, how long were you married to him? Tell us what your relationship was like. Did he ever talk about his life back in Iowa? Anything like that?
Well, we were together for 10 years. I think we were married for 8. And but he didn't really talk much at all about like high school days or anything like that. He talked about the Marines, he didn't really talk about, he didn't talk about that time. Just when he was younger. I think he said like 14 was when he left home. And then our relationship, honestly, he was a good man. He took care of me. He worked hard. He didn't require me to work. He kind of wanted me to stay home, but he also let me kind of grow up too. He was letting me hang out with my friends and stuff. I was pretty responsible. I always made sure things were done at home, and I waited for him every day to come home from work. And I think it was March or April. It was April Fool's Day of 1997 that I found out I was pregnant with our first daughter. And like 2 weeks later, we got married.
So that was a little bit of background from Lisa about what their relationship was like. We did hear in that interview later what her thoughts were about the arrest, which are very, very interesting.
And also a little bit surprising, as you can hear in her voice, she still sounds like she has care, dare I say the word love, for her ex-husband. She was not piling on, she wasn't bashing him.
Yeah.
She wasn't pointing out flaws. People certainly listening to the timeline around when they met and how young she was, especially given his age, and we have some questions around there, but that's not what we're focusing on. She sounds almost grateful for his time in her life. She knows at the time of this interview, he is in Iowa facing first-degree murder charges.
Yes.
So we think the interview with that reporter in Oregon is going one way. Then it pivots.
Hard pivots.
Yeah.
We'll let you hear it from Lisa.
about a year ago, detectives from Iowa came knocking on my door here in Boise, and they were asking me all kinds of questions about him, and I didn't have a whole lot of answers. I didn't know, and they said it was a case, what it was from 1983. When he got arrested, then it hit me. And now, honestly, I hate to say this, I really do, because I still love the man. I always will. He was my first love. But I personally, I think he's guilty. I do. Why he would have that DNA evidence, if he wasn't. Also, just some of the things that he had said to family, that I overheard after he had spoken to the detectives, about how he might be going away and after Christmas and he might not see them again, like my kids. It does suck. My heart goes out to Ron Novak's family. And I know they want answers. And I really hope, but I have doubts. I really hope that Michael does open up and tell the story from his perspective, because they deserve answers. They do.
A lot of compassion there.
Right? And she has
For the Novak
compassion,
family.
not just for her ex-husband in this moment, hoping that he'll be honest, but also being positive about him, but for people in Iowa she never met. So, Lisa's, she just sounds like a kind woman caught in an impossible situation. She has 2 children with a man who now faces a first-degree murder charge, and she's really conflicted. And I'm grateful she opened up to talk, because we don't often get that sort of inside perspective.
And it's such an honest, real-time reaction to learning that someone that was so important that she said took care of her for a long time may have done or is accused of a terrible thing. And coming to terms with that and being willing to speak to the news also.
Yeah.
Which is, you said it, we don't often get that kind of secondhand information from people who know someone who's accused of a crime. That doesn't usually come out until a trial.
And if there is no trial, because there's a settlement, not a settlement, but if they plead guilty or plead down to a lesser charge and plead guilty to that charge, there are often huge holes in the storyline. I think of the situation also out of Idaho, Brian Koberger, who, as we know, has pleaded guilty to the murder of those 4 Idaho college students. Because there now will be no trial, it is likely we will never understand, because I don't know if you can ever understand someone's motive for killing someone. We may never get insight into maybe his thinking or even all of the elements of evidence police had against him. So we don't know if there's going to be a trial in this case. One thing she also shared, I believe, is that when he was arrested, he wasn't alone. Michael Schappert. One of their kids was with him. And as she hinted at there, the kids had said that their dad kind of prepared them to live the rest of their lives without him, potentially. So I think when they took his DNA and interviewed him more than a year before the arrest, he was realizing that his house of cards was falling upon him.
Yeah. It wasn't just the investigators getting ducks in a row there.
And I don't, she was even a little bit fuzzy on her timeline around, she said that he claimed he left Iowa at age 14. That may have been he left his parents' house. We do know he went to high school in Iowa.
Yes, which is when we asked at the press conference any kind of connection that they might have had, all they could really tell us was that Michael Schappert went to high school, at Kennedy High School. But they had no information to share, at least, about whether they knew each other.
Okay. Well, and again, maybe we will learn more when the trial comes. But there were just so many layers of this story, obviously dating back from the murder in 1983. And as we received more information around the arrest and reading that criminal complaint, and then talking to the ex-wife of Michael Schappert, we haven't had any updates that I'm aware of.
No.
Since then. So right now, as things stand, Michael Schappert is sitting in the Linn County Jail here in Cedar Rapids, waiting trial. We don't even know a trial date yet.
No, I don't believe we do.
Because this all happened pretty recently.
Yes.
He may waive his right to a speedy trial, which means this, as a first-degree murder trial, could be pushed back 1 year, even longer, if he does not waive his right to a speedy trial. we could have a conclusion here pretty quickly. So we will stay tuned. You know, these cold cases, you know, you can almost count them on your hand, how many that have been sitting for so long in our viewing area have a resolution, so to speak. But we have to underscore, law enforcement and the victim's family still believe there is someone else out there who was part of this killing.
That's really, and they are asking people still to come forward.
Do you see a scenario where Michael Schappert turns on his buddy who helped him allegedly commit this crime in order to get maybe a lesser charge?
I've wondered if
I have not thought of that.
I've wondered.
Okay.
If there is more than one person involved,
Yeah.
could there be a ringleader of sorts? Could there be someone who said, let's go to the house? Could, you know, someone who kind of took the lead on these things? And could that involve a plea deal? We don't know. But it's very interesting because law enforcement is still looking and they're still asking for anyone who knows anything about this case or these people to come forward and just share anything they might think is useful. So we will put up the contact information for the Linn County Sheriff's Office in case you might have something to share with them. But they are still investigating this, and I believe the motive is still similar. The motive is still that they likely went to the home with the intent to rob Novak. So that at least has stayed similar through all these years.
And you know, you think of 2 days before Christmas when this went down. Maybe Christmas Eve in the early hours. You know, they're not 100% sure when Ron Novak was attacked. But that, you know, holidays tend to be seared in our mind more so than, say, a Tuesday in September. So for people who lived in Linn County in 1983, maybe went to Kennedy High School, maybe had a sibling who hung out with these guys in middle school or something, they might have forgotten about this. Not forgotten fully, but put it out of their mind. You know, maybe just go through your photo albums from Christmas of '83. Maybe just revisit, because you'd be surprised what nugget of information could contribute to bringing even more justice in this case.
Absolutely. Sometimes it all comes down to a sock.
As in this case.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to this special edition of your Trusted Local podcast. If you'd like to hear more about cold cases like this one or series like this, please let us know. We're always looking for feedback.
Absolutely, and we hope you have a terrific day, however you're consuming us, on YouTube or on a drive or just hanging at home. And be sure to tell your friends to listen to your Trusted Local podcast here at KCRG TV 9.